You're on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel on how to create a content moderation court, a discussion of Facebook's Independent Oversight Board. I'm Tess Bridgeman, and I'm joined by three distinguished panelists here today. I'll be moderating today's event, and I'll first turn it over to each of my panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Dex.
Hey, everyone. I'm Dex Hunter-Torricke. I'm Head of Communications at the Oversight Board.
And
let me go second. I'm Ronaldo Lemos. I'm a lawyer from Brazil, and I specialize in technology and have served in quite a few boards and institutions in regards with freedom of speech.
Wonderful. And Julie?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Julie Owono, the Executive Director of Internet Sans Frontières, or Internet Without Borders, a digital rights advocacy organization defending freedom of expression online, as well as privacy. And on top of that, I also am a fellow at the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford University and an affiliate of the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. And I'm very happy to be here.
Wonderful. I'm Tess Bridgeman. I am co-editor-in-chief of Just Security and a senior fellow and visiting scholar at NYU's Reese Center on Law and Security. I served in the Obama administration in the State Department and in the White House as a special assistant to the president in the National Security Council Legal Office and the White House Counsel's Office. And I have a background in the design of institutional oversight mechanisms and did a doctorate in international relations at Oxford, where that was my focus. So full disclosure, I consulted for Facebook on the formation of this oversight board. And fortunately, we have people with us today who are affiliated with the board in multiple different capacities, both as external stakeholders who've consulted and engaged with Facebook and the board during the process of its formation, and Dex in his current capacity as well. So we're well placed to talk about the issues of how the board formed, why we have a board, what challenges it faces going forward, what it means for Facebook, what it means for free expression on the internet, and what we can look to in the road ahead as the board develops and as it receives new cases and starts making decisions that are binding on Facebook on a range of really important issues. So let me start with the question of why we have the board at all. Why was it important that Facebook established the board? And is this the kind of mechanism that Facebook needed to address the challenges it faces with respect to content moderation? And I can maybe start with Julie for that question.
Sure. Thank you, Tess. Well, why did Facebook decide to give up part of its power, which is to decide on its own what is allowed and what is not allowed on its platforms? It's because public pressure and expert pressure. We've seen what not paying attention to content flowing on these platforms, what the consequences can be. Examples such as the role of social media platforms in inciting hatred and bringing countries towards genocide, to platforms contributing to election manipulation. All this has created a momentum in history in which everybody agreed, including the platforms themselves, that something had to be done in order to, first of all, as much as possible, avert this from happening again in an ideal scenario, but at the very least, being accountable for not doing the right thing at the right time. So first of all, it was public pressure, and that speaks volume to the importance of democracy and people's voice on this incredible tool and incredible space that the internet is and represents. So that's one of the reasons. But also, I think genuinely, that's my opinion, having worked in countries where Facebook is honestly the internet, I think that genuinely the platform, that particular platform, is willing to do better. I do think so, and I will mention some examples. For instance, in Africa, where the internet is provided sometimes through, people have access to internet using a product called Free Basic. So it's basically internet that you don't pay for, but it's Facebook that provides it, and you have free access to, I mean, your data are not deducted from your bundle when you surf on website chosen by Facebook and including Facebook. And what we have seen is that indeed in those settings, in those countries where the only point of entry to the internet is Facebook, is WhatsApp, there is a huge problem, an increase in hateful discourse and an acceptance of speech and discourse that would have never been accepted in the physical world, if we speak so. But we have also seen, and we've reached out as organization, we've reached out to Facebook's teams in those countries, telling them, pay attention to what's happening. And although the response was not always as immediate as we would have expected it to be, and as immediate as it would have been if we had been in the US or in Europe, at least there was a response. And that, I think, is important and makes a difference compared to past examples of companies' negative impact on societies, especially on poor societies. So yeah, to summarize, there was pressure, but I think there was also, to some extent, a will on the part of the platform to do better.
Ronaldo or Dex, do you want to add to that on the question of why we have an oversight board and whether that's the kind of mechanism we need to address these issues that Julie has been describing for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, was the oversight board created to be a reputational or a regulatory shield for Facebook? And maybe that's something that went through the minds of people at Menlo Park. Frankly, at the oversight board, we don't really care what they thought, in terms of that. That is not what any of the board members, or any of the full-time staff in the administration have signed up for. I think from our perspective, it's just very clear, as Julie said, that things weren't working. And the status quo in content moderation is broken. And certainly, regardless of whether the oversight board is the solution to it, or just, as I think, one solution amongst many that are going to be required to really transform this over the long term, I think everyone here is just sincerely driven by seeing if this can be something effective and that can make things better than what we currently have.
And can you draw out a little bit for us, Dex, how the board does fit into Facebook as an institution? Is it part of Facebook? Should we think of it as completely independent? In what ways, what mechanisms does it have at its disposal to hold Facebook accountable, to use Julie's word? How is accountability effectuated through the oversight board?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the board members are very independent from Facebook. There are lots of folks who have been vocal critics about Facebook. So you have a range of leaders here in different fields, from academia and public policy and journalism, who do not have their professions tied to Facebook, and they feel no problem, speaking up against Facebook. And Ronaldo and Julie will both, make their points of view very, very clear. And they are not at all aligned with Facebook's talking points. I will say structurally, we are not at all part of Facebook. We are funded through a trust that Facebook set up, but we have a set of trustees who are there to assure the independence of the board. You cannot, impact the compensation, or interfere with the decisions made by members based on something that they've done. If Facebook doesn't like a decision that members have made, they can't punish them. And really, everything we do has been designed to provide transparency around the decisions that the board is making. And this is very, very different from the way Facebook approaches their content moderation decisions. I think historically, Facebook has been rightly criticized for making all these decisions behind the curtain and not really showing their working, as it were. And the board has been designed to do the exact opposite at every stage. As much as possible, we are trying to illustrate how members came to decisions around these very, very thoughtful processes. And I think that's an important part of showing that we are independent as well, and that neither Facebook nor anyone else leaned on the board to make crowd-pleasing decisions. Instead of what we're trying to do, which is make very principled and thoughtful decisions.
Yeah, that's a really helpful context and thinking about how the actual design of the institution shields it from undue influence by Facebook as a company, and also guarantees that the individual members are able to exercise their judgment independently. I think those are really important features to point out. And as you say, there may be some who want a reputational shield, but it's really up to the board whether it serves as that or not. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If we have something that looks like, to borrow a phrase from the judicial context, a kangaroo court, it won't function very legitimately on its own terms, nor will it actually provide that reputational shield. But if something actually is functioning legitimately and does provide accountability, is transparent in the way it works, it might be a reputational shield because it does provide accountability. But perhaps wouldn't be if it doesn't, or at least that's one way we might think about it. Ronaldo,
Yeah.
I'd love to bring you into the conversation in terms of what are your thoughts on the institutional design aspects of the board? And I know that you were one of the independent stakeholders who was involved in consultations leading up to its creation, I think as was Julie. Would love to hear your thoughts on how that process worked and whether the board's evolution is something that you think makes it equipped to deal with these moderation problems.
Sure. So taking one step back, I think the moment we are living right now is a moment in which we have new problems that were never seen like this before. And for that, we need like new institutions. So I always like to emphasize that the Oversight Board is an institutional experiment. And it's one, of course, that I'm fully invested in, and I think will play an extremely relevant role, because just like when we turned from the 19th century to the 20th century, and people started to live like in big cities, you had to come up with a lot of new institutions. So you had to have access to the courts for every individual. You have to deal with the problem of justice being done by the crowds, and a lot of other issues that led to a redesign of a lot of institutions. So I think we are in that moment right now for the 21st century, because we have new kinds of problems. Some of those are of global impact. And I think this institutional experiment that was initiated by Facebook is one of the key elements. So I'm really invested in it so that it succeeds, because I think it can lead the way for other forms of institutional design that we very much need them at this moment. And the other point is regarding the board independence is the board does not work in a way that it has to maximize Facebook profits. So maximizing Facebook shareholder profit is not one of the principles that the board operates under. So the board is looking for something else. It's looking, as I mentioned before, into solving and helping solve very difficult tasks that are not going to be solved right away. It's a marathon. It's not like a 100 meters race. And that's why I really think that the fact that the board now exists and is independent to operate and to look at this very complex problem, I think, at least from my personal perspective, gives me a lot of hope that we can come up with a new set of institutions to deal with a new set of problems. I think you're on mute.
Thank you. That's a helpful way to think about it. And one of the ways that we can look at and perhaps even begin to quantify the independence that you're all describing is looking at the trends in the first few cases that the board has already been called upon to decide, right? So we've had 5 cases, and in 4 out of those 5, so fully 80% of the cases, the board has overturned a Facebook content moderation decision. And in 1 case, the board agreed with Facebook's decision, although the scope of what comes before the board is currently restricted. And I think we should talk about the ways in which that's going to evolve in the future. But currently, the board only receives, from users anyway, complaints about Facebook decisions to take content down, not to leave content up. So from the perspective of the aggrieved user, they're concerned that their expression has been stifled, or that their voice has been taken away. But the other way to think about the difficult content moderation decisions that the board has in front of it is that there's always a set of users on the other side that might feel aggrieved because that very expression or that very speech might be causing them harms, might translate into some of the real world harms that Julie was describing, might have physical safety implications, or might have discrimination or hateful implications in terms of the increasing polarization of our societies, in part through the siloization of social media. So when we look at what kinds of cases the board has in front of it right now, where the question is, was it correct that Facebook took the content down? Do we see a board that is necessarily showing independence, or do we see a board that perhaps is showing a thumb on the scales towards free expression? Can we say from this set of cases that what we see is board members showing independent judgment from Facebook, or is it that board members value free expression more than they value some of the other content moderation policies that Facebook is actually trying to apply in some of these cases?
If I can jump in, I think that there are lots of very interesting aspects to the different decisions that we've made, but to speak directly to the doubts, the skepticism, the legitimate skepticism around whether or not we're just rubber stamping Facebook, whatever Facebook is doing, and that's even more visible because we're just here, after the bad has been done, and particularly after content has been taken down. I would like to point to one example, and Ronaldo will speak better to that. But in one of the decisions, initially, so we received tons of appeals. That should be clear. We have, Dex will have more accurate figures, but thousands of appeals during the first round. And out of these appeals, there happens to be algorithmic and content moderation errors on the part of the platform. And in one of these cases, this happened, and particularly the Brazilian case, in which there was a breast cancer awareness campaign that had been taken down because breast was visible. And it allegedly violated adult nudity policy of Facebook. And initially, the Facebook recognized it was an error and decided that, okay, you don't have to decide on that one. But the board said, no, it's not on you to tell us what we have to decide on or not. So for me, this was an interesting moment in which we saw that the board is, I really see what my colleague and myself are trying to do is to make sure this experiment lives up to the society in which we are in. And that's a society in which things evolve. You have to be agile. And yes, you have to protect human rights, you have to be agile as well. We have to get inspiration, of course, from the text that exists out there, and that's what we're trying to do when we assess whether or not in a particular case Facebook's decision was compliant with international human rights standards, but also when we assess whether or not a particular policy was complying with international human rights law. But beyond that, we're also trying to be receptive to the fact that things happen in the world out there, and we have to be able to respond. So even if a content was put back up, there is room for the board to say, hey, we still want to look at it, and we still want to tell you things about this case that didn't go right, and still make recommendations that you will have to respond to. So for me, it's I really see that this role and the board as also an institution that's not, rigid. We don't need that rigidity. We also need to be able to bring forward innovative solutions, and innovation in our own mandate. And for me, that's also part of the reason why I'm part of this adventure, because I didn't want to be in a mold in which I was stuck. I'm an activist. I like to do things. I like to try to fail sometimes too. We will fail, obviously, but it's those failures that will help us, come up with something that's more interesting for the mandate that we have, which is to make sure human rights are a principle when moderating content on social media platforms.
So I should have noted from the outset that Julie and Ronaldo are board members and bring that perspective to us today. I'm not sure that we established that in the introductions. I think it's become clear, but wanted to make sure we're all on the same page about that. And Julie, just to pick up on that really important point that you were just making about a couple of points, one about how we innovate and how the board innovates and adapts and stays agile as the world changes around us. And as Facebook as a company changes, and as the contexts that we're responding to change, there's a question about how the institution can and should evolve going forward. And I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on what we should look to in terms of what additional types of decisions should come within the scope of the board, if any, what metrics it should be using for its decisions. And on that score, Julie, you were mentioning international human rights law. And I think it's a really interesting thing for us to drill down on for a moment, because Facebook is not a state actor, right? Facebook is not a government. Facebook doesn't work for any government. Facebook is not itself bound by international human rights law, yet has chosen to inject that lens as one through which the oversight board should view its decisions, right? So we have both Facebook's own policies, its content moderation policies, and we should talk more about what those are in a minute, and what the public sees and what more there might be that the public is not aware of, that the board is pointing out in some of its early decisions is actually driving some of the content moderation decisions that come in front of the board. But then we also have this set of public law principles, international human rights law, that is an additional lens and is a completely separate, of course, body of law from Facebook's own internal private company policies, and may not always have the same underpinnings. In addition, of course, the same content, different values may be driving those. And Ronaldo, you started speaking to this a little bit when you mentioned, right, Facebook is under an obligation to generate profits for its shareholders. The board is not. So why are international human rights law principles appropriate for the board to be applying in looking at this set of content moderation decisions? And how does that work in practice, given Facebook itself is not, in its earlier content moderation decisions that then come to you on an appeal, given Facebook is not itself bound to apply those principles?
Sure, I can speak a little bit about that. So there is an overall trend of human rights law and principles increasingly being applied by private companies, right? So one of the things that I think Facebook is doing correctly here is that even before the board was established, those principles started like increasingly to inform Facebook values and rules and norms for content moderation. And I think this trend is here to stay, not only in regards to freedom of speech, but also overall concerns that every company has to be basically attentive right now. So the idea of ESGs and including ESGs as a dimension of how the private sector operates, I think this is an ongoing trend, and it's going to get deeper and deeper. For the purpose of the work that the board does, I think the human rights body of law is extremely useful. Of course, it doesn't exhaust the types of rules that the board will look into. Facebook's community values and community norms, which are quite extensive, I think they're also an important reference to what the board does. But I think hierarchically, human rights law basically serves as something that is above these provisions and something that help guide and interpret and apply how they should be actually used in the concrete decisions. So I like this departing point. And I also like to emphasize that the board is an evolving institution. So this is our starting point. I see a lot of people that I like and respect, some of them criticizing the board because they wish the board had more power than it already has. And that is very interesting because this is a way of basically demonstrating the need for an institution like the one that we are part of. But it's also something that if you want to be effective, you have to do a good job, you have to do a good work, and you have to be extremely attentive to all these stakeholders that are actually looking into our work. So throughout my entire career, I've been a profound supporter of this idea of multi-stakeholderism, especially in regards to internet governance. And I do see, of course, this is my personal opinion, the Oversight Board as a great example of multi-stakeholder institution. The more we feel fulfill this multi-stakeholderism principle, the more we are going to be legitimate, and the more I believe we can evolve, perhaps to address some of these concerns and criticisms that we should do more. So I think we are on the right track. And actually, I'm very happy with the initial batch of decisions that we have released. And in these very decisions, we have already talked about issues that I think are structural and extremely important for the future of content moderation. So in my particular view, and of course, I'm part of this, I think we are off to a good start.
Can you share, Ronaldo, and maybe Julie as well, some of those structural issues that some of the first cases highlight? And let's tease out how, as well, we think Facebook as a company should react to the board pointing out those structural issues.
Sure. There's a great article by Evelyn Dueck analyzing the first batch of decisions. So everyone that is watching us, I definitely recommend you to take a look. She's a lawyer, so she's taking the legal perspective in her analysis. And I think that she was extremely attentive to what those decisions actually touch upon. But I'll mention maybe just 2 points. So one of them is that in the breast cancer decision, one of the concerns that we have raised as a board is the issue of automated removal of content. So one of the things that I think we all agree at this point, anyone that is involved with technology governance, is that technology in and of itself is a form of governance. So whatever is embedded in the code has the potential to actually include norms, values, and principles, and so on. And the board pointed out to that in that particular decision. So the content had been removed by an automated process, and the board actually has the capacity of doing policy recommendations to Facebook. And one of the policies recommendations that we did was precisely about this particular point. So this is a structural matter, and it's something that we will continue to look and continue to take as an important discussion for the work that we do. And I think that illustrates the type of thing that I think a lot of our stakeholders are concerned about. And I think that's the first point. Second point is the one that Julie mentioned. And in the same case, the breast cancer case, Facebook decided to basically reestablish the content as soon as we took up the case. So basically, Facebook just said, no, this is a mistake, of course. So here's the content back. Even so, the board decided to take up the case because we wanted to make sure that the oversight board is not a part of Facebook's internal content and moderation process. We are something else. And I think that case also left this extremely clear. And once again, if we keep doing a work that is attentive to what a broad range of stakeholders are basically raising and concerned in terms of how platforms operate in the world of today, I think we can evolve, and I think we can build our legitimacy and actually deal with a lot of important issues.
Yeah, I think that observation you make, Ronaldo, about the decision to go ahead and take that case, the adult nudity case coming out of Brazil, is a really foundational moment for the board interpreting its own jurisdiction and saying, Facebook is not interpreting our jurisdiction, we're interpreting our jurisdiction. And that's a hugely foundational principle that I think will carry the board forward as an independent institution, not beholden to Facebook's decisions about how it should operate. But I want to press back on the first of your 2 points. You, I think, very rightly explain to us how technology is a form of governance. And I've heard it said before, right? Code is a series of decisions about values. And we have to be very aware that technology is not neutral. And in fact, if we treat it as a black box, there's already a set of values encoded in that technology that will be carried forward. And we have to open up that black box and look at what those decisions are and what values they're upholding. But I want to play devil's advocate for a moment because of the volume question that Julie already pointed out. If you think of the huge volume of appeals that came to you, then you look kind of behind that at the much larger volume of content moderation decisions Facebook is making every day, every minute. And then we look at what kinds of harms we're most worried about as a society. So Julie was sketching out at the very beginning some of these concerns about the proliferation of hate speech in parts of Africa where the entry point for the internet is Facebook. And everywhere from Myanmar to the US presidential elections and the rise of violent right-wing militias in the United States, the bigger concern doesn't seem to be Facebook is taking too much down. It seems to be Facebook is leaving too much up, or at least that its algorithms are promoting content that is hateful and is divisive and that may be causing real world harms and harming physical safety. And we have, right, the cases that the board has taken, what I see as potentially the outliers, right? The cases where in fact, the point of the user was misunderstood in terms of the post, the algorithm got it wrong or a person got it wrong. But is that actually a very small segment of the types of content moderation choices that we should be most concerned about as a society? And shouldn't the algorithm sweep with a broader brush, at least as a first attempt to handle the large volume of content that Facebook is having to moderate at all times, until humans can take a look and say, no, actually, it was okay to leave this up. It's not going to cause the real world harms that the algorithm is designed to try to detect. How should we handle that trade-off between the volume of decisions that need to be made, the kinds of harms we're trying to protect against, and the policies being upheld? Yeah, Julie.
Thank you, Tess. No, that's very important, and it's been part of discussions between members of the board. How are we making sure that what we're doing is actually useful? Two things on that. The first thing is, before coming to your question, I would like to insist on one aspect. There is, beyond the moderation problem, there is also another reality, which is users who spend a lot of their time on this platform and use it for various reasons, including interacting with their families, organizing protests, and so on and so forth. When they're faced with a content that's being taken down, or their account that's being locked, or some of the features of their account that's being locked, it's already a problem that needs to be addressed. You mentioned earlier that Facebook chose voluntarily to apply to itself international human rights law and standards to its policies and to how it conducts its business, basically. And part of these principles is that when a business does something wrong, it has to find a remedy to mitigate the effect of that wrong. And in offering that opportunity for appeal, for me, is already a huge step for many users, even before we get to the bigger picture and the bigger questions. Now, when we get to those bigger questions, the macro effect of the board's decision, I think we shouldn't underestimate the potential for the decisions that we make to impact several cases and impact policy change in Facebook. We've seen that with the first decisions that we've made. Like Ronaldo rightly reminded, we are allowed to make recommendations to Facebook. It's true, Facebook it's not bound by these recommendations, but it has to respond to these recommendations, and it has to explain why it will not implement these recommendations, which is already a huge step in the direction of shedding more light on the black box, which Dex mentioned earlier, the black box of what happens behind the scenes when our content is flowing on these platforms. For me, that is an interesting pattern. Facebook did already respond to some of the recommendations. They've changed recently their policies on health misinformation, following one of our decisions related to COVID and misinformation that had been taken down. And for the first time, Facebook decided to explain what kind of content, misinformed content or disinformation content, it would take down for the platform. That is a huge step, because we went from a state in which we just didn't know, we just saw things being taken down and others not being taken down. But now we know which are taken down and why they're being taken down, who Facebook has consulted. We know they're working with the World Health Organization, to assess, to address a list of claims that are not verified by science. That's a very interesting step, and it opens up an avenue for the board also to say, well, even if this process of deciding which claim should be taken down is proportionate, is legitimate, is necessary based on the international human rights principle. So for me, it speaks a lot to, yes, the macro. Of course, it's not the only solution. I completely agree with Dex's point made earlier, but it's a very good sign, in my opinion, that the company is transparent about implementing the recommendations that we make, and how the decisions that we make on the content which bind the company, how these decisions impact other similar cases, and how at scale the company can try to integrate our rulings into how it conducts its business.
Just to add on to what Julie was saying, also I understand Facebook has just updated their Instagram policy late yesterday to reflect the decision that was made around the breast cancer case. So actually clarifying their rules around how they're moderating nipples that are featured in images on the platform. So I think that's another important example of how they're being quite responsive and taking on board the guidance we're providing. I do want to just push back a little bit on the devil's advocate point you raised, Tess, which is around whether these things are outliers, which we're considering currently, and whether the content that has been removed from the platform, the impact there is less than potentially the things that are still left up and that we haven't yet got within our scope to moderate. And I should emphasize, of course, that those things are going to be within the power of the board to make decisions on, and we expect that's coming over the next few months. I think, as Julie pointed out, human rights are incredibly important, and one of those most important rights is freedom of expression. And giving people voice, extraordinarily important in so many different communities and contexts. And I think the decisions that the board has made already and the cases that the board has taken up, they are not at all unimportant issues. I don't think they are diversions from bigger challenges. I think they are really, really important. And it's been very interesting to see how some of the discourse around this, which is overwhelmingly driven by, I think, very privileged folks in the West who have access to a lot of different means to get their own voices out, has been to almost dismiss those issues as though there's something else. We're waiting for the bigger thing to come along. And actually, I think decisions, that speak to things like misinformation and hate speech and violence on the platform, and you think things like COVID, those are all really, really important for a lot of people in the world. And when their voices are silenced on these issues, actually that has huge ripple effects across society in a lot of ways. I would say we don't yet know the full impact, really, of what Facebook's choices in some of these areas really are. And that's going to be something that we determine over the coming years for the board. We're going to be scrutinizing what Facebook really is doing to see just how much of a big deal this is. Certainly, we know that Facebook makes millions, probably, of content moderation decisions every day. And actually, this is a good chance to get a better glimpse of really what are the trends and the patterns going on in the way they make choices.
So you mentioned some of the most kind of hot button issues that I think folks, at least in the West, are worried about these days: misinformation, disinformation, but also across the globe, where we're seeing huge problems with the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation through Facebook and other platforms. What has come before the board in that realm so far, and how has the board handled it? And what do you think the lessons are for Facebook coming out of the board's earliest decisions that touch on those issues?
I quickly comment on that. So first, we have to note that Facebook's initial reaction to our first batch of decisions was really great. So it was very cooperative. The post that they announced in regards to our policy recommendations, it was extremely responsive to the decisions that the board has taken. And not only that, we already see the results. So the issue regarding female nipples on Instagram, this has been historically a contentious issue, and basically for the first time this issue developed into something new because of a board decision. Not only that, I know that the issue regarding the takedowns and the leave-ups are extremely important, and of course, the board and Facebook are working on leave-up cases. Maybe we'll take those in the future as well. But the point is, the board principles and the board reasoning in every decision, it doesn't matter if it's a leave-up or a takedown, the impact in both of the cases, and especially for misinformation, I think this is extremely important. So take, for instance, the COVID-19 case that the board decided. It has produced an immediate impact over the policies that Facebook actually apply to COVID misinformation. So Facebook has announced that it will ban from the platform any type of allegations that are false about vaccines, including that they cause autism or that it's safer to contract COVID than to be vaccinated. So one of the things that the board pointed out is that these standards, they were not clear. And even though we decided in our case, it was actually a case in which we told Facebook to reestablish a certain piece of content that was taken down, our recommendations were very clear about why that particular post was basically reestablished and what Facebook should do to improve its COVID-19 policies. Facebook heard, and Facebook has effectively implemented those policies. So the point about the leave-ups and the takedowns, I think it's an important one, but it doesn't matter because when the board basically reasons about these issues, I think the impact is an overall impact. And so far, it's been extremely, in my view, positive, and it has been very responsive on the part of Facebook.
Yes, if I could just rapidly add to that, speaking very personally, I was honestly very surprised at the level of commitment and responses that we received from the company during the decisions and the deliberations. So I hope it helps shed a bit more light on whether or not this is just a PR stunt. Obviously, from the part of the board, it's not. We've spent a lot of time working on this, and we've received very in-depth responses from the company, even including information that are not necessarily known by the general public, but were so instrumental and important in our decision making. So yes, I share Ronaldo's surprise and hope that it's really a good effort.
So Ronaldo, you mentioned earlier that there are some who think the board should have even more power than it does. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, right? The board decisions about individual pieces of content that come in front of it are binding on the platform, on Facebook. But as Julie mentioned earlier, the recommendations about policy, about how policy is implemented, about how transparent the policy is, these other types of recommendations, they're advisory. Is that the kind of issue that people are pointing out, and when they advocate for more power on the part of the board? Do they want the board to actually be able to change Facebook's policies in a binding manner, or what are the other kinds of things that you see people advocating for? And do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea to vest the board with those powers at this stage?
Right. Well, first of all, people want a lot of things, right? They want a lot. Wanting is free. And I think that's a very important point. So to answer your question shortly, they want everything. And the problem is precisely that the mandate of the board is very narrow in the outset. And I think that's a good thing, because as we all talked here about, the oversight board is an experiment, and it's a brand new type of institution. So we have to start like that. So wanting to have a different outset, a different beginning, a different set of powers right away, I think it's great. It demonstrates that people, they do want to exercise something that I particularly find important, which is institutional imagination. And the times that we're living right now are times that more than ever requires institutional imagination. And in my particular view, I'm speaking my own perspective here, I think the design of the oversight board has been extremely careful and wise in doing so the way it did. So having an initial mandate that is very precise, it's very determined and specific, I think that's a good thing. But as I mentioned before, there is no reason that we cannot evolve. So we are on an evolving organization because we are living in an evolving world in which things often change very fast. And that's fine, but I'm completely comfortable with the fact that we are starting with a very specific and clear mandate.
Dex, can you say a little bit about the volume of cases that the board has in front of it, maybe how that compares to the volume of cases it has to choose from, and the volume of content moderation decisions that Facebook is dealing with, and try to give people an idea, just to draw out from Ronaldo's last point of how things might evolve. So you mentioned at the very beginning, Dex, that this board is a very important component, but one component of how we need to think about reforming content moderation. So where does the board fit in that picture? How much volume is it able to address in these decisions that are having ripple effects across the platform and are in fact already leading to changes in policy? Is that sufficient, or what other types of innovations do you think we need alongside the board to meet the needs and to meet the demand of reforming content moderation?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I was just thinking when Ronaldo said, people want a lot of things. I wish I could say that as my on-the-record quote every time a reporter calls me about something people are mad about. It works for all situations. Exactly.
Wanting is free is the quote we should all use.
Exactly. But it's true. People do want a lot of things. And I think one of the interesting dynamics is all of this work that the board is doing very thoughtfully on these, very consequential issues, but not always necessarily the ones that are captivating headlines in places. that work is taking place against this backdrop where people are really, really mad as hell about Facebook and about the impact of social media companies in the world. And one of the things that we're really careful to guard against is the board is not here to just opine about things that are going on in the world. The impact of the board is going to be felt through the decisions that the board members are making on cases. And I think the fact that we are not here to opine does not necessarily devalue the need for there to be channels where those voices of users can be heard. And this analogy, the analogy which we're actually gathered here today to talk about, in that framing, as Facebook's Supreme Court. I don't love the analogy. I don't use the analogy myself. But one thing that's true is if we are, a quasi-court-like structure for Facebook, we certainly aren't designed to be Facebook's parliament. That's a very different thing. And I think there's a lot of people out there who wish that the board was more like a parliament, and we were able to convene hearings about anything we like, and we provide a platform for people, to really batter Facebook, through our words. And that may well be a structure and something else that deserves to be considered. And we were just talking before we started the session about this piece from Kate Klonick that just came out, looking at some of the thinking that went on before the board was set up, and how Zuckerberg and others at Facebook have been considering different structures that may need to exist. That's something that may come down the line. It probably won't be the board providing that kind of structure. In terms of the kinds of cases that are coming before us, look, we've just made decisions on 6 cases. Our 6th case was actually just announced a few hours ago for a case involving India. There are 3 more cases before the board right now, including the case about the Trump account suspension that was referred by Facebook. Many hundreds of thousands of user appeals have already been received. So I think the number is closer to 200,000 around now. Our last publicly released number was about 150,000, I believe, a few days ago. So it's really, accelerating quickly. I think the board will continue to try and focus on things that are big and significant and have important potential ripple effects across other decisions and other pieces of content that Facebook is making. We may well have to explore other mechanisms so that the board can look at different categories of case and potentially move faster on those types of cases. As Ronaldo said, this is a grand institutional experiment. And I think we're in the very early days and we're learning a lot. And that model will definitely evolve as we go.
Absolutely. Well, we have only a few minutes left, and I'm hoping we can get some final reflections from each of you on either anything that you think we should have tackled that we have not yet, or anything you want the public to understand about how the board operates, what its role is, and what you hope to see it do. I think we have in front of us, as you all have said, a grand experiment that is off to the races and really functioning, I think, as well as anyone could possibly have hoped, in terms of both the kinds of reason-giving decisions it is providing to the public, the transparency that is introducing to the platform, the diversity of cases, the diversity of board members themselves. Do you have any reflections about how the board is working as an institution so far? Whether the board, in fact, has things that it should already be looking to do better, or should evolve going forward, and what do you want the public to know about the role that the board is playing?
Thank you so much, Tessa, because this is a thought that I wanted to share earlier. So thanks for the opportunity to do that now. I think one aspect of the board that I think we're doing good, and I hope we'll do even better, is, to be open to the public. That's really something very important for us. We have a public comment process that's open for every case. There's a window, I think, of 7 to 10 days. For the Trump case, for instance, we had to extend the deadline. We actually had 10 days, gave 10 days to people, organizations to provide their opinions of what we should do in this particular case and why. But if we could do better, I think it would be to make sure that this openness is inclusive enough. We do have a huge amount of both cases and comments coming from Northern America and Western Europe. That's not the reality of the platform now. We know that 70% of users, of Facebook users, are located outside of the US, for instance. So hopefully this is something that will be reflected also in the cases that we receive, and also in the interactions that we have with the general public and organizations from the civil society.
Yeah, access is absolutely key to equity, and I'm glad you raised that. Ronaldo, do you have any parting thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think like when we think about building an institution, all sorts of criticism are welcome. And what I mentioned about people want a lot of things, that is actually great. And that's what we should expect. We should expect to have continuously stakeholders that follow the work that we do, that make suggestions to the board and to Facebook. That's how you build an institution. And that's exactly what we are looking for, like the types of things that have come up just because of the creation of the oversight board has expedited the debate about content moderation probably by 5 years. So this is already great, and that's the way we should keep going. So as I said, I'm enthusiastic, not only because of the work that the board can do, but also because of the example that the board can actually provide in terms of how we can evolve and rethink our institutions.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for not only enlightening us today with your comments, but also for the work you're doing on this really important set of issues. I think we all know that it's one of the hardest challenges of our time, and it's one that's, as we've all noted throughout the presentation today, something that is changing as fast as we can wrap our heads around it. So it's a service that you're doing and helping us figure out what the path forward is, and in staying, as Julie put it, agile as you do so. I'd like to also thank our audience for tuning in, and it's been a wonderful conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Julie and Dex.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.